I'm here today with Doug Haynes, who's the president of Point72, one of the most innovative and progressive hedge funds on the street today. And Doug, cannot thank you enough for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Before we start talking about Point72, let's talk a little bit about your life and what it was like growing up in your hometown.
So I grew up in West Virginia. I was born and raised in Morgantown, which is where West Virginia University is. My dad was a professor and then eventually department chair for the engineering school at West Virginia. He later went off and started his own business, small private business, but most of my childhood was spent as a professor's kid. And my life was sort of half completely hillbilly, like hunting, fishing, camping, very outdoors.
Any moonshine?
Yeah, we didn't make it.
There you go.
But if you were 13 and hadn't tasted moonshine, you weren't living right.
That's right.
So that was half my life. And the other half of my life was this was the unusual part. The engineering students were from everywhere in the world. So, very strange to grow up in a place like West Virginia, which is not the most cosmopolitan, but have been exposed to people from all over the world from the time I was a baby. And so that was sort of the early part of my life was shaped by that. I wound up going into engineering, partly because I was just following my father's footsteps, partly because I had a love of things mechanical. I had a love of sort of complex problems.
And then you joined the CIA. I got to ask you that question. What was that whole experience like?
You have to think of intelligence before cyber, right? So imagine a time when sort of the transition from the intelligence community being all about computers like it is today and all about how information moves electronically to a time when information was mostly moved through people, right? And it was like that transitionary period. And some visionaries in the government knew or had a view of how the world was going to evolve, so they tried to get ahead of it by buying a ton of technology. And I think they just assumed, I was a kid, but you could see the pattern. I think they just assumed that they would buy the technology and people in the agencies could learn how to program.
Right.
And that turned out to be wrong. So the agency had combed the country, found all of these undergrads who were great programmers. Very few of them were computer science majors. They were kind of everything. And they picked me up in that. They came and recruited at West Virginia University and hired me. And so I went and programmed with them. I went in as a programmer.
I never got anywhere in programming. I was, but anyway, so you then went to McKinsey?
Yeah, so I did. I went to GE, had a great experience there. That was the only place I ever worked as an engineer, and I only did that briefly. And then I had this very surreal experience where GE hired me as an engineer, very quickly put me into marketing, and then, as I got more and more responsibility in the marketing and the commercial side of the business. I was with GE's plastics business. I felt like I was practicing business without a license. Right? I really didn't know. I would sit in meetings and be part of decisions that I really didn't understand what everybody was talking about. Remember, I grew up in an engineer's house, right? So I was very familiar with technology and very familiar with mathematics and things like that, but very naive in the business world. So I wanted to go back and get my business degree. And as I was leaving GE, one of the senior people in HR, because I went and asked for an academic leave. I had to get this academic leave approved. The person knew me pretty well, had been kind of following my career in the business, in the plastics business. And I said what I wanted to do, and she said, I'll grant you the academic leave, but we'll never see you again. And I said, why? And she said, you're going to go join McKinsey. And I had no idea what McKinsey was.
Right.
And so I, very politely sort of nodded as though I knew what she was talking about, which I had gotten very used to pretending I knew what people were talking about while I was practicing business without any education. And then I got to business school, and you're going to swear I'm making this up. The first year I was at business school, all my classmates would say, oh, you're going to wind up at McKinsey. And I still had no idea what McKinsey was. This is all pre-internet, so it wasn't easy. I couldn't pull out my phone and just Google McKinsey, right? So I'm sitting there kind of playing along, and I finally thought, I better find out what this is because pretty much everybody thinks it's what I'm supposed to do. So I looked it up and read about McKinsey, read a little bit of the history of McKinsey. There were a couple of books that had been written by people at McKinsey. Marvin Bower, the not founder, but really the original builder of McKinsey. I read his book, and I concluded they were right. So my second year, the only company I interviewed with was McKinsey.
Well, it's a great firm, no question about it. Now you're here, and how did you find your way to Point72?
So I really knew Steve Cohen, and I within McKinsey, I was 22 years there. So in McKinsey years, like a lifetime. I think in McKinsey years, I'm like 138. I eventually was the leader of McKinsey for the Northeast region of the U.S., based here in New York. And a little bit later, I decided to retire from McKinsey. And it had nothing to do with coming here. It really didn't have anything to do with going anywhere in particular. If you have a career in consulting, there's an age by which if you don't retire from being a consultant, you will retire as a consultant, right? There's sort of once you pass a certain tenure, it doesn't really make sense to leave the profession. There, you don't have enough runway left to go and do something else and build that new set of skills and so forth. And I had almost retired from McKinsey a couple of times prior, just feeling like there's another growth opportunity out there. There's something more that I can do. And then this time came around, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to make the jump. And a couple of my friends had done so and were very happy, and I just felt like it was right for me. So I retired. This was Thanksgiving of 2013. And I was looking at a couple of other really interesting opportunities, kind of in the middle of all that, and Steve called me. It was like just a couple days before Christmas. I remember because I was at home and working on something, getting ready for Christmas with the kids. And he says, I need you to put together a McKinsey team. And I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, we've exited all of our outside capital, and we've had a bunch of change, and we've downsized the firm, and we've done all this. We've made all these big changes. And he said, we really need to kind of reset, and I want a new strategy, a new direction, and I think this is what you do, and you've gotten to know me, and I trust you, and I want you to put a team together and get on the ground over here. And I said, that's a great idea. It'd be an even better idea if I hadn't retired 6 weeks ago. And Steve said, would you consider being an advisor to me, even though you can't put a team together, would you just be an advisor to me and join the firm and just be based as part of the firm and do that? And we had an explicit agreement that I would do that for about between 6 and 12 months, whatever it took to kind of get a strategy in place that he was comfortable with and kind of get everything lined up the way he wanted it to go. And then I would go on and do whatever it was that I was going to do next. And my wife was thrilled when she heard it because she had me kind of kicking around the house for a few weeks, and the idea that I would be out of the house and unlikely to jump at the next thing that came by just out of being antsy all seemed like a perfect fit. So I came as the head of human capital, but that pretty quickly that mandate spread to touch a lot of different aspects of the firm. And then 6 months later, he winds up offering me the opportunity to be president. Now at the time, I'm still sort of rolling along thinking that I'm helping him, getting to know a business and an industry that's interesting, getting ready to do the next thing. It hadn't occurred to me that this might be the next thing.